lost private. We're in Normandy.
Thanks for checking in here at the We're Not Lost Private podcast. We appreciate all your support. But do you know how else you can support us? By signing up at Patreon. For $3 a month, you'll have access to all of our episodes, plus access to all kinds of bonus material, like our quarterly newsletter, photographs, and official paperwork, and research that goes into each and every show. You can follow the pod on a multitude of platforms such as YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, pretty much anywhere you catch your pods. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon. Welcome, everybody, to episode 44 of the We're Not Lost Private podcast. I'm your host, Joe Muccia. And man, it feels like it's been a million years since I've been in the seat to record a show. In between episode 42, which is the first part of this two-part series. And now I ended up going, for those of you who are following along, I ended up going on vacation, a family vacation to Croatia, and stumbled on some pretty cool history for that locale. And if you haven't checked out episode 43, I highly recommend it. It's a short one. You can fit it in. I think it's only about 10 minutes, but there's some great footage if you want to pick that one up on YouTube of some of the areas and things that we were talking about over there. I want to thank Doug for joining the We're Not Lost Private team, and everybody else who continues to stick with it with the podcast. Lots of exciting stuff coming up. We basically got the shows mapped out through Thanksgiving. There's going to be a healthy dose of some Pacific theater stuff. We're going to have Dave Holland coming on talking about his new book on Guadalcanal. Andrew Borer is going to come on and talk about Harlan Block and 7 of his high school buddies who joined the Marine Corps. And for those of you who are living under a rock and are World War II history fans and don't know who Harlan Block was, he's one of the original, he's one of the Iwo Jima flag raisers that was killed during the battle. That's going to be an interesting one. And then, of course, the next show after this one, I believe, is Josh Donahue is going to come on and talk about Marine actions during the attack on Pearl. That's pretty cool. We got Joe Balkowski, who's a titan of World War II history, especially Northwestern Europe. He's the official historian of the 29th Infantry Division. He has written books on Omaha and Utah. He personally reviewed my Operation Urgent Fury book and provided not only editorial but critical comment and review for it, and I'm very appreciative of him. He and I have been talking about doing a show about the 29th for a long time, and conceptually we were discussing like how to approach it. And my idea was I had been rereading Glover John's Clay Pigeons of San Lo, and it's just a beautiful dissection of the mentality of a combat soldier post Overlord. And when I approached Joe, my idea was, hey, let's do this, but let's do it where we look at the mindset of the 29er. Not to mention having all the stress and the adrenaline from the jump. It's surging through you, but it's also there's peaks and valleys too. And the guys hadn't slept probably. A lot of them, remember they were alerted for the deployment. They were in their assembly areas and they originally thought they were going to jump in on the 5th. So a lot of them are amped for basically 24 to 36 hours at this point. And, that weighs into your mind as you go into attacks. They had conducted an attack into Le Droueries and had seized the Ferme Delaunay and the German positions along southwest of where the assembly area is. So they've actually taken the area. But I want to talk about Bob Ballard a little bit and his executive officer, Bottomley. Ballard was not cut in the same vein as, say, Colonel Johnson. Colonel Johnson was a fire breather. He was a firebrand. His men loved him. He played on their emotions as a war fighter. Where Bob Ballard was much more of a methodical thinker. He was definitely what you would call an officer and a gentleman. And I don't think he had any intentions of being a career soldier. Not like Johnson or, say, Julian Ewell, but he was definitely a good officer. He kept his welfare of his men always in his mind as he calculated what he was going to do. And he was much more quiet and reserved than, say, Johnson. But he was definitely roundly admired and respected by his men. Now, Bottomley, when he landed, if for those of you listen to episode 42, he was injured on the jump and he was hobbling along. He was a good foil to work alongside Ballard. He allowed Ballard to move forward and command the battalion while Bottomley kept the supplies moving, helped Ed Allworth, who was the battalion adjutant, manage the casualty collection point until he ordered Allworth back to Angevilla Plain to manage the casualty collection point at the church there, the famous church. Oh, and before I get too deep into the rest of the story here, I do want to point out, I have to give a lot of credit, in addition to my own research to put this pair of episodes together. I want to point out a lot of this wouldn't have been possible without the research and writings of people like George Koskamaki, Paul Woodage, Mark Bando. So I'm definitely call attention to them and the fine work that they've done to kind of chart a lot of this history. And I was able to take a lot of that and augment what I had researched and what I knew and the interviews that I had done with some of these veterans and stitch this all together. Because when you read the official histories of it, it's not dry, but it's definitely doesn't have the human element to it. I mean, it's really the only people that are cited in the official accounts are essentially Ballard and Bottomley and a few of the officers, but not the enlisted men. Kind of are they fly under the radar. Let's put it that way. They're not really given equal footing in terms of the storytelling. So I was able to go back in with the exception of, say, Koskamaki's and Bando's work and Woody's work on Angels of Mercy, but I was able to go back and run through interviews of the enlisted men, and they provide a depth and a color and an intimacy to these actions that is severely lacking from the official account. So, and I hope that comes out over the course of this pod. But let me get back into it. Again, Bottomley is really his performance allows Ballard to be upfront with his men and really understand the battlefield. And that's going to come into play later on as Ballard deals with problems from up and out with higher headquarters. But it's Bottomley who's doing that heavy lift back in the assembly area. As troops are coming in and checking in, guys that are not injured or wounded, that he's funneling them forward to their companies so that they can take part in the fighting. And the ones that are injured, if they're lightly injured, he's pushing them back out to go recover aerial delivery containers, which contain all of the supplies that the battalion's going to need to keep going. So these two men are filling their critical functions as leaders of the battalion. Now, at some point during this action, Ballard, who had jumped an SCR 536 radio, gets a call from Colonel Johnson, his regimental commander. And Johnson has no idea what Ballard's tactical situation looks like. And he basically orders Ballard to disengage from the fight and join him at La Barquette, because Johnson's situation is perilous as well. He does not have a lot of troops, and he's afraid that he's going to get knocked off the objective there. And he wants Ballard to come in and reinforce him. But Ballard also knows he's in a fight right now, and he knows that he can't disengage right away. So he essentially protests the order. And Johnson just does not take it well. He felt that, like, Ballard was letting him down and he's being disloyal. He really rips him a new one over the radio, and but Ballard held fast. He knew it. He knew what he was up against. He knew he didn't have enough men to possibly hold the positions that he's already seized. And unfortunately for Ballard, Johnson considers this a slight and him being disloyal, and he holds it against him until Johnson is killed by enemy indirect fire in Holland. But Ballard Ballard sticks to his guns and basically says, I can't disengage right now, sir. I will get there as soon as I can. But right now he's holding his position. Now, he also knows he needs to consolidate on the objective. He's got to push forward troops so he can continue to hold the position. So, as we talked about in the last episode, Walter Wood, who had put together a scratch force of men of 3rd Battalion 506, who had misdropped into their assembly area, and most of these guys came from G Company. They were occupying the first intersection of the first two buildings on the west side of the farm, as you look at it on a map. And for those of you who've been on the ground over there, those buildings are consistent with where the monument now sits to Lieutenant George Schmidt, who was killed during the assault. About that time, E Company platoon leader Frank Gregg arrived at the assembly area. And he informed Ballard that the E Company commander, Captain Donald Brown, was approximately a mile away, and Brown had collected up about 75 men, most of them from F Company. Ballard orders Gregg to go back out and bring the group in, which he does. This is a huge shot in the arm for the battalion, because 75 men was roughly the equivalent of what Ballard had in 2 companies. So he gets reinforced with a substantial force at that time. Now, what's really interesting is there were several Germans that were captured during the assault on La Ferme Delaunay, and one interesting account of that comes from Sergeant Jonathan Joyner, who's a squad leader in 1st Platoon of E Company. And as his men were consolidating around the farm area, they were just joking around, and because of the amount of fire that they took and the adrenaline that's flowing, they're all kind of kidding each other, and they're joking. And one of them said to one of the other guys, who was a New York native, he said, "Hey, buddy, you'd like to be back in Brooklyn right now instead of here?" And one of the Germans turned around and said, "Where in Brooklyn?" in perfect English, and the group was flabbergasted. And so the exchange takes place between this German and this kid from Brooklyn, and they found out they lived about 3 blocks apart back in Brooklyn. So it was really kind of those of you who watched Band of Brothers, that sequence with Scott Grimes playing Don Malarkey talking to the German master sergeant who had been from Oregon. That's a kind of similar vein of this particular instance. But one of the guys that was part of Wood's scratch force from the 3rd Battalion of the 506 is a guy named Michael Nassif, who went by the nickname Nasty. I mean, he had a really rough jump coming in. He recalled as he came out of the aircraft, and he passed through a large stream of flame coming out of the engine, the left engine, and the prop blast was massive. And he said he lost his musette bag on the jump. And in his mind, what he thought happened to it was, now those of you who know what a musette bag, it's a small backpack that the paratroopers used to carry, and you couldn't carry a lot in it, but the guys tended to overstuff it like a turkey. And it's flipped forward and rides underneath your reserve chute. So when you come out of the aircraft, the reserve chute keeps the musette bag from flopping back up and hitting you in the face. But anyway, the musette bag is attached to your fighting harness by a spring-loaded J hooks. And according to Nasty, the J hooks, basically the force of the prop blast basically bent the metal flat, and the hooks disengaged from his fighting harness, and he never saw his musette bag again. He recalled falling through several streams of tracers, and he could watch them slice up through his canopy as he was coming down. And he hit like a sack of bricks, he said. When he got out of his chute, he linked up with his buddy from G Company, Private Charles, and forgive me as I'm working through his name, Puzahanich. And as they moved out, a German mortar shell landed nearby, and Nasty took some shrapnel across his right hip, and Puzahanich was really severely wounded. He took a number of pieces of shrapnel, and he couldn't walk. And Puzahanich told Nasty, "Get going. You got to get to the assembly area. We got objectives." And Nasty didn't want to leave him. And finally, Puzahanich just basically says, "Get out of here." And he props him up in a tree, gives him extra grenade, gives him his weapon, patches him up, and ends up leaving him there. He finally finds his way to the combined assembly area where 2nd Battalion of the 501st and his own unit, the 3rd of the 506, are kind of assembling. And he falls in on that group of that scratch force of Lieutenant Woods. They ended up attacking that the off on the right flank. They do this sweeping maneuver, which hits the German left flank, and he basically comes in with Wood into that area right where the monument now sits. Nasty remembered Wood as what he's called him an all right guy with plenty of guts. He also recalled the seesaw nature of the fight for the farm. And he said, as they made their way through the assault, one trooper, an Italian-American kid from his platoon, took a rifle round through the helmet. The round had hit the front of the helmet, basically penetrated the steel, but didn't penetrate the liner, traveled along between the two, and then exited out the rear of the helmet. And the kid took his helmet off and kept running back and forth along the line, showing everybody what had happened to his helmet. And the guys were just giving him the guns about it. They were just, teasing him about, 1 inch lower, and we wouldn't be having this kind of conversation. But as they settled into the defensive position, they had no idea, but that the tactical situation around the farm and in that area was about to change, because the Germans counterattack about that point. Now, Major von der Heide, as many of you are familiar, the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment commander, brought his companies into the mix there. He brings his 9th and 12th companies online and has them attack across to the west along the main line of resistance for Ballard's battalion. He has his 10th company swing all the way out to the left flank of his position, and they run headlong into what's left of Wood's force. Now, also what's going on at this time is the 3rd Battalion of the 10th 58 Grenadier Regiment is also filling in the gaps in the lines between von der Heider's company. The whole goal here is to push the Americans back out of the position and retake the positions that were previously held. They do this. They end up doing this. The Germans came on down the hedgerows in a counterattack, and the brunt of it fell on Wood's men because they were the farthest forward, and they had seized the building, so they had the most firm tactical position. They ran into Wood's men repulsed the attack, concentrated fire on the Germans' point element, but the Germans end up reattacking and then get within hand grenade range, and this forces Wood's force to start pulling back. Now, E and F Company are still in their positions as well, and the whole area is thick with German troops. They're pouring into the line. They're coming up from essentially the southwest of the line that's held by the Americans, and they slam into this line. Ed Turer, who was a private in 3rd Platoon of F Company, recalled shooting advancing German infantrymen from his position behind a hedgerow. He hit one of them 6 times with his carbine before he finally fell down. I mean, he's frustrated over the fact that his carbine didn't have enough knocking down power to take this guy out. Later on the day, he ends up throwing a pineapple grenade. It bounces off a few branches and lands in his feet, and he ends up blowing up in front of him. And he gets pulled back by Ed Fatboy Hughes, his platoon sergeant, all the way back to Angeville. F Company also had a machine gun position forward, all the way up forward towards where that intersection sits, where those of you are familiar with, I talked about Gillis's Corner. It's in that neck of the woods. So anyway, Freddie Lenz, Orville Miller, and Henry Ostrowski were manning that 30 caliber. And at some point, before the German attack slammed into them, Lenz got out to go relieve himself, and another trooper jumped into behind the gun. And before Ostrowski and Miller could stop him, he laid down on the trigger. Nobody knows why he decided to do that. The Germans weren't attacking at this point. But he lays on the trigger and he basically blows through an entire belt of ammunition. Lenz finishes up what he's doing and runs over. Before he can berate the trooper, he leaves the position and Lenz hops back down behind the gun. And really, I mean, the moment the gun started firing, it's a clear signal to the Germans that there's a machine gun position there. And no sooner did Lenz get behind the gun than a German mortar shell came in and hit. It landed right on the position. Lenz and Miller were killed instantly. Lenz from the concussion, Miller with shrapnel, doing all the heavy lifting there. Ostrowski is badly wounded in the head. His left eye and cheek were hanging down from his face. I'm sorry if this is a little grotesque, but I think it bears telling because of the nature of the follow-on actions that happened. Private First Class Ken Ryler and Private Ralph Smith immediately rushed to the stricken trio. They assessed that obviously Miller and Lenz are already dead. Now Ryler had always been in the platoon, but Smith had been a commo man in 2nd Battalion headquarters, and there'd been some battalion politics going on in the headquarters, and he is eventually reassigned down to F Company in 2nd Platoon. They quickly move to Ostrowski and assess his wounds and start to get him bandaged up. Now he's still conscious at this point, or at least semi-conscious, but he falls into an unconsciousness, but he's lucid. They bandage up his face. They basically fold everything back up against his head and bandage it in place so that if they can get him back to higher level care, they can start treating him and maybe save the eye. So they do the best they can with that. As they're doing so, they can hear the German attack ramping up. And Smith recalled hearing the peculiar ripping sound of the German machine guns firing over them. They hit Ostrowski with 2 syrettes of morphine, and then they douse the wound with sulfa powder and then bandage it up. Unfortunately, Ostrowski, still lucid, keeps trying to fiddle with the bandage, so they end up having to take an extra bandage and tie his hands together down against his waist so he can't rip the bandage off his wound. And they remained with him, and he began murmuring softly, and he finally lapsed into unconsciousness. And they withdrew from the position, carrying Ostrowski back. They eventually get him back to Angeville. And those of you who have read again Woody's Angels of Mercy, you can hear that. You can go back and check in on the rest of the story there. I won't go into that. And Woody's done a fine episode on Angeville on his own. So again, I won't go back and talk about that because he'll do a much better job of it. Getting the casualties back from the German counterattack is very difficult at this point. It took 40 minutes essentially as the Germans are attacking for each of these line companies to be able to pull back along with their wounded, pull back their wounded as well and evacuate them. E and F companies pull back half of their force. They leave the other half as a covering force. Now they'll basically leapfrog back as the Germans begin to roll over the positions. They know they can't hold the positions. They can easily see that the Germans have too many troops and they're overwhelming them. So instead of dying in place, they pull back. Again, Ostrowski goes back to Angeville. He's treated by Robert Wright and Ken Moore. Again, go read Woody's excellent book about it. Unfortunately, Ostrowski later passes away from his wounds, despite the efforts of the 2 gallant medics back at Angeville. Eventually, the fighting stalls as the Germans retake their position. Ballard has pulled all of his forces back to just south of Angeville. But he can't even get back there because there's fighting going on around the village. And So what he does is basically lays up at the assembly area south. And he knows he can't he knows he can't complete the movement and the attack towards St. Côme du Mont at this point because he doesn't have a sizable enough force to bludgeon his way through the German lines. So he repositions his men back near the drop zone, and this occurs around noon. So it's about noon on the 6th now, and this doesn't sit well with the battalion officers that are left standing. I mean, they're upset. They've fought for this ground. They've taken casualties. They've lost men, and they are not happy about basically giving up ground that's been paid for by blood. Company F is probably the furthest southwest of the second battalion companies, and they continue to take the German positions under fire. But even then, they suffer a few casualties during these engagements. Ballard's really concerned about the amount of casualties that he's taken at this point. He's far below half of his authorized strength. And those that are still standing, some of them are walking wounded. He's in a real pickle as he thinks about what he's going to need to do. He can't take the farm without reinforcement, and he can't leave all his wounded and head out to support Colonel Johnson at La Barquette. So he really is in the throes of a command conundrum. But the only way for him to complete his mission is to clear the German position. So once again, he figures we're gonna have to attack again, and he's got to push them back out of position so he could free up what was left of the battalion, so he could, one, either go and reinforce Johnson, or two, assist other elements of the 101st, specifically the 506, to capture St. Côme du Mont. He doesn't have much of an option at this point. He's got to attack again, and he doesn't like the idea, but he's going to have to clear Ferme Delaunay again and complete his push towards St. Côme du Mont. And this is a terrible decision for him, but I mean, he's mulling it over, and another call comes in on his radio. Major Allen is pulling his force out of Bas-Adville, which is helping to pin down part of the German right flank. And without Allen's force there to do that, it's going to allow the Germans to bring the full weight of their force to bear on Ballard. And the pickle that he's in just got way worse, because without Allen's force, he's going to face the full weight of the Germans, and there's no way his battalion is going to be able to knock them out of those positions on its own without Allen's force providing pressure on that flank. So he makes the decision to attack again before Allen can withdraw. He figures that if Allen is still in position, it'll tie down some of the German troops, which will allow him to break the German defensive line. So he orders the attack. He goes over to Bottomley. They take stock of their weapons. They are not in good shape in terms of supplies. He's got 630 caliber machine guns and 260mm mortars, and the ammunition for the mortars is limited to 20 rounds per gun. And he's only got 3 boxes of ammo for each of the machine guns, so 250 times 3 does not leave him a lot of firepower. He's going to have to rely that his machine gunners are going to be judicious with their ammunition usage. They're not going to just lay back on the trigger like that one kid did that got Lenz and Miller and Ostrowski killed. Across from him, by Ballard's assessment, there are 4 German machine guns and an unknown amount of riflemen with MP40s and K98s. This will be an underestimation of the German arsenal. There are way more machine guns than 4, but he doesn't know that at this point. So Ballard knows that the strong position at the farm, that farm complex, he's not going to be able to take it, at least on a frontal assault. So what he decides to do is take a flanking maneuver. He's going to push out towards the German right flank. The attack will come. It'll be E and F Company that are going to bear the brunt of this flanking attack. All right, they're going to split into 2 columns once they get to a hedgerow that runs parallel to the German lines, about 150, 200 yards from the German positions. they'll break into two columns. E Company will be on the right flank as they face the German positions, with F Company on the left flank. They end up getting reinforced by another 45 men that under Captain Donald Brown. He's the E Company commander who finally makes his way in. What's interesting is Brown is not mentioned during the assaults, and he does not command E Company during the assaults. It's very weird, and I have yet to figure out why. I don't know if it's Ballard loses faith in Brown, or Brown is wounded. I don't think he's wounded, because I've looked through all the morning reports. And I haven't seen any record of him being wounded, but he doesn't really figure into the fighting, which is strange. If you're a company commander, you're going to be want to be up front with your guys, but he doesn't really figure in the fighting. But anyway, the force finally steps off at 14:45 hours, and they don't receive any incoming fire. I think because of the nature of the layout of the hedgerows, there's essentially 4 parallel hedgerows northeast of the German positions. And I think because of the nature of the way they're laid out, it affords Ballard's force a bit of concealment on the way up to their departure line, 200 yards or so away from the German line. They both push forward, and F Company finally splits from E Company, and they get as far up to where Lenz, Miller, and Ostrowski were killed earlier in the day, and where Leo Gillis had shot the German machine gun team. As they approach the intersection near that area, they run into a wall of fire. I mean, they are stopped absolutely cold. Mortar rounds begin pelting the area, and 4 men go down from F Company in rapid succession, and the battalion basically gets stopped right in its track. Now Ballard brings up his 60 mortars, and he begins to pound out rounds, trying to knock out the German machine guns, but he soon runs out of the rounds. Those 20 rounds go pretty quick. E Company had pressed up along F Company's flank, trying to relieve pressure on them, but they get halted by enemy fire. Not only that, they're taking flanking fire from Ferme Delaunay and all the German positions there. I mean, this attack goes on for about 8 hours, and finally at 2200 hours, Ballard basically says he hears on the radio that Allen's forces pulled out, and he knows he cannot break the German line at that point, and he orders a withdrawal again. And again, this leaves a bad taste in the mouth of not only now his officers, but his men, who feel like they're just being thrown against the wall of fire for no good reason. And now they're down to only a few belts of machine gun ammo for them. The battalion pulls back, and they maintain that position about 200 yards northeast of the German line. And I want to quickly talk about Quincy Cougar, platoon leader, third platoon F Company. At this point, he's been at the forefront of his platoon and company's attacks all throughout the day. Third platoon had pulled back, obviously under Ballard's orders, but Cougar had been far forward and possibly didn't hear of the order directly coming from Ballard. He just found his men back in what he considered lounging and basically goofing off. And this doesn't sit well with the hyper aggressive Cougar. He feels they're goofing off, and basically he knew they still had a lot of hard fighting to go, and he again probably didn't hear the withdrawal order, and he wanted to take his platoon back up there and re-engage the Germans. So he pulled his model 1917 45 caliber pistol, and he'd been walking up and down the platoon line, basically pointing his gun at them and telling them they're basically a bunch of slackers. And this doesn't sit well with the platoon. And one of the most popular guys in the platoon is a guy named Charlie Merritt. And Merritt speaks up, and he basically says, "Hey, Lieutenant, you got to calm down. We were told to pull back." And Cougar just turns on him and starts yelling at him. He pulls out his jump knife out of his boot. Several of the other platoon members basically intercede, and they calm Cougar down, but he's still pissed off. He puts his knife back in the sheath, and he continues to walk up and down the platoon, berating them. Finally, Private First Class William Wilson who had been interviewed by Mark Bando, historian Mark Bando, said he'd never forget the sight of that revolver pointed at his face. He said the muzzle looked like a cannon. And several of the men were unsure whether Cougar would have actually shot them. Again, this comes courtesy of Mark Bando's research. Cougar continued to rant and pointing at one of the buildings at the farm said, "I saw Krauts going into that house over there, and I'm going to attack it and take them out. Who's coming with me?" And he didn't get a lot of support. Basically, Cougar looked at them and said, "All right, piss on all of you. I'll fight the whole damn German army by myself." And he basically moves to the hedgerow and parts the hedgerow about is about to go through it. And what he didn't realize that the Germans have been pushing up small patrols up towards the American lines to try and figure out where the main line of resistance is. And as Quincy Cougar parted the hedgerow in front of him, he's riddled by a German with an MP40. And Stanley Green, who was manning a machine gun up near that forward area of F Company. He was at the furthest point of 3rd Platoon's advance, spotted the German and basically riddled him with this 30 caliber. I mean, based on Bando's research, the German was dead before he even hit the ground, but it didn't matter because Cougar had been killed. Jim Cuthbert, who was Culbreth, who had been one of the platoon jokers and had oftentimes traded barbs. He did it in a very joking way, and Cougar would take it like that. Would trade barbs with Cougar in the ranks. He crept up to the Cougar's body and retrieved his pistol. And he stood over the body of the German and emptied the pistol in the German's head. And he could be heard muttering, "You killed my lieutenant." He would later be killed in Culbreth would later be killed in Bizary, but in his mind, he likely avenged his platoon leader. As for the rest of the battalion, Ballard ordered a roundup of weapons and ammo and communication equipment from the drop zone. So men were sent out beginning at about 0300 hours on the 7th to go retrieve all those supplies. And they end up retrieving quite a bit, which is good because they're going to need it for the upcoming fights. Ballard orders watch standing at 50% with a stand to at 0430 hours. So basically, he orders the battalion up and at him at 0430 hours for another attack on the German positions. So Ballard receives word that he's going to assist the 506 attack on Saint-Côme-du-Mont by attacking Le Droueries again. He's got to unhinge the German defense, so basically they can pound into Saint-Côme-du-Mont with the 506 and clear it. And again, this is going to be a hell of a nut for him to crack. While several men end up, finding their way into the assembly area and get fed into the companies, they're still, lacking their full authorized strength. And Ballard is well aware of this, and he requests through leadership channels, through headquarters, for artillery support for his attack. He figures, "I'm out of mortar ammunition, basically. I mean, I've only got a few rounds for each gun. The next best thing is to ask for artillery support." Now, fortunately, the USS Quincy had been providing fire support in the area, and he's able to arrange this. Unfortunately, during this time, like the Germans are not sitting by idly while the Americans are parked in their hedgerows. They began pushing small patrols up again to find where the American main line of resistance is. And these patrols, they don't come quietly; they come firing, and essentially they're trying to get the Americans to reveal where their machine gun positions are so that they can knock out the machine guns. But the Americans play it coolly, and they just return rifle fire and grenades at the German patrols, which chases them back off. Despite this, though, because they've identified several of the American positions, the German mortar fire comes in, and by all accounts, they don't suffer any casualties from it, thankfully. But Ballard again pushes his troops forward, and it's almost like he's back to start positions where he was on early the 6th. Again, he's pushes his instead of he withdrew everybody from the flank from that right flank attack or the attack on the German right flank, pulls them back now, and he's going to conduct the main attack again. It's the main German positions from the Ferme Delaunay all the way to the east of the German positions. And it's not really popular with the men. They've been through this dance before already, and it's getting kind of tiresome. Um, they push forward to hedgerow again about 200 yards away from the German positions, and the German machine guns see the movement and begin firing over the heads of of E and F Company. And so Ballard calls up Colonel Kennard and Colonel Sink via radio, and Ballard basically says, "Hey, can I get that artillery support?" And they're like, "Well, it's going to be naval gunfire support, and it's coming in from the USS Quincy." And they arrange for the rounds. They have to disengage because they've been firing in support of the 506. So it takes a little bit. It takes about 40 minutes for them to get the rounds adjusted and on target. But the first 4 rounds come right in and slam right into the target. They hit right around the farm area. They're hitting around the German positions. But at some point, whether it's because the Quincy repositions itself or the gunfire data doesn't get relayed properly, the next few rounds or the next several rounds impact on friendly positions. And I'll warn folks beforehand, this will be a very graphic depiction of what happens, especially at F Company. Now, accounts differ. Some witnesses say that it was 4 rounds. Some say it was as many as 12 rounds. But regardless, it doesn't help F Company because the rounds land almost uniformly on their positions as they're getting ready to attack. Now, Charles Henderson, who was a rifleman in F Company, he's beheaded by a round. Erwin Spears has both of his legs amputated at the knees, and he eventually bleeds to death in 3 minutes. Leo Malik of 2nd Platoon, the shrapnel impacts all over his legs, and he loses a lot of flesh from his legs, and one leg he ends up getting amputated, but he ends up living a long life, comparatively speaking. John Falk had an eye blown out. Henry McParlin received numerous wounds, which eventually prevent his further service. Interestingly, he was treated by Battalion Mortarman Tony Zanzinger, which prevented McParlin from bleeding out. Interesting to that, the pair had been childhood friends back in the States, so it was interesting for Zanzinger to discover it was his childhood friend. But he ends up patching him up and getting back off the line. Carl Hubing, who had been the CO of the battalion's light machine gun platoon, he's killed with shrapnel perforating his head. Bill Cook, who was a machine gunner in Hubing's platoon, woke up underneath the lieutenant's terribly wounded body. Glenn Derber, many of you Glenn lived a long life. He was very outgoing, and he ended up talking to a lot of folks. I had a chance to talk to Glenn a few times. Just an interesting guy, very smart guy. But he viewed himself as like the kid of his platoon, the little brother. He got some shrapnel in his shoulder, and he was armed with a Springfield rifle. And as over the course of several days, as he continued to fire his rifle, the shrapnel ends up working its way out of his shoulder. But he stays on the line and continues to fire. The F Company basically comes to a standstill. I mean, they are completely immobilized due to the shock of what happened. 3 of the machine gunners pull back to battalion headquarters because of what happened, and Ballard basically halts them. They tell him what happened, and then he orders them back up to the line. And he as he's doing so, he calls for another salvo from the Quincy, and the 3 machine gunners look at him like he's got a third eye in his head. But he basically says, "Don't worry, the next rounds are going to be on target," and they were. But that barrage doesn't dislodge the German defenders. And a postscript in this, and those of you who are viewing this on YouTube, that trio of troopers on the left, on the right side of the screen, the center one is Jack Schaffer, and the trooper on the left is Erwin Spurs. Schaffer ends up going back to Utah Beach to be pulled back to England, and Spurs's brother comes ashore with one of the infantry divisions and spots the eagle patch on Jack's shoulder and comes back and asks him about his brother, not knowing that the two had been in the same platoon. And he has to tell the brother that Erwin has been killed in action. He did not tell him that it was friendly fire that killed him. And Spurs's brother basically said, asks Jack, did he get a few of them before he got killed? And although Jack didn't know whether or not he did or not, Jack assured him that he had. And I want to make sure that I point out that that story came from Mark Bando. So the battalion basically is halted again by this. The Germans are not dislodged from their positions. Now I want to take a little bit of break from talking about this attack, and we're gonna finish on the actions on the 7th shortly. But I want to circle back around and talk about Zolly Rosenfeld's stick, who I talked about in part 1. Now Rosenfeld again was a supply sergeant with G Company of the 506th. And we had talked a little bit about his jump and the gathering of troops from his stick and not from his stick. But I wanted to go back and talk because a lot of the actions that they're involved in are around where Major Allen has his force. And this gives a little bit of insight into the whittling down of that force before Allen pulls out. And these guys weren't even part of Allen's force, but they were in the area. But what happens to them helps to thin out the American line there. And this impacts Ballard and his battalion as they attempt to take that ground that they're fighting over. Now, Rosie had been issued a grease gun in the assembly areas before they had taken off. And this is not something he was happy about. He had been armed with a carbine for almost his entire time in the 506, and he enjoyed firing the carbine. He was an expert rifleman with it. So he was not happy about being issued this grease gun. He had landed and rallied up in a group with Lieutenant Lutal, who commanded the Battalion 81 millimeter mortar platoon. And they had moved past Bas Adeville, where Allen's force was. They'd actually kind of gone past where Allen's force had been. But they received, once they got to that area, they realized they had gone too far. They're not where they were supposed to be. So they kind of backtracked and they started receiving some fire as they moved back along the line they had previously come. And according to Zal, they never saw who fired them up, but they kept moving. And there were 8 troopers in their group, and they found a small hillock with some good cover, and they remained there overnight. And at one point, according to Rosie, they were almost accidentally overrun by what he called Cossacks riding on horses. I thought that was pretty interesting. On the next day, on the 7th, they were startled by the sound of a large caliber artillery ripping through the air overhead. He said it sounded like somebody ripping a bed sheet in half. Now I have to believe that these were rounds from the Quincy, so they could hear those rounds coming in. So they can't see where those rounds are landing, but they definitely heard them coming in, and they kind of stay in that position all day. And at dark, they decide to move out because they figure they'll use the dark, the concealment of the darkness, to get away and move up to where they need to be to link up with their battalion to execute their mission. They almost immediately run into an ambush. The Germans begin firing at them from a hedgerow as they were advancing forward. Rosie's hit by shrapnel and he's shot several times, including one right in the center of his left thigh. Nelson, the G Company armor, and those of you looking at this on YouTube will see Nelson in that training jump stick picture that's up. Nelson is killed right in the same action. Littell advances up to where Rosie is, and sees how badly he is, knows he can't evacuate him, and he tells Rosie, I'm sorry, I can't leave you, I can't take you, and he has to pull back out. And Rosie's taken prisoner, and he eventually ends up in the same prison hospital with Johnny Gibson. And fortunately, um, the Allies overrun the hospital, and they're eventually freed. But again, I wanted to take some time to talk about that particular fight because one, it talks to the thinning out of forces at base Adaville, and it also talks about the other troopers in the area hearing the naval gunfire support from the Quincy coming in. And I thought that was interesting how because of the muddled up nature of the jump and the 3rd Battalion of the 506 and the 2nd Battalion of the 501st, basically splitting a DZ between them, you're definitely going to have these overlap of forces, and that these actions influence each other. But back to Ballard and his battalion. Um, he's frustrated. I mean, he's really frustrated at this point in time about the attempts to destroy the German force holding them up. In addition, he's getting a lot of pressure from higher headquarters to break the stalemate. Colonel Johnson had his assistant S2 call Ballard up and order him to gather up all the supplies he could. Again, calls him up again. So this is the second time Johnson is calling up Ballard and telling him to break contact and make his way to La Barquette. And I'm sure this sounded fine to Johnson, but he has no idea what Ballard's tactical situation is. I mean, Ballard knows that this is an impossibility at this point. The Germans are there in front of him in force. He can't break away because to the east is the swamp area. And to the southwest is the German force holding that main line of resistance near from Delaunay all the way through Adaville. And he knows he can't turn his flank and then walk into a swamp, especially with all the wounded he has. So he can't do this. The Germans won't let him. If they're smart, they know see the Americans turning their flank and moving away from them. The Germans are going to counterattack. They're famous for counterattacking. And they'd be vulnerable moving away from their defensive lines. And then they wouldn't be immobilized, but certainly the going would be very tough going against the swamps, through the swamps. And for those of you that are looking at the slide, I apologize that there's some verbiage there in the center of the slide that I forgot to get rid of. And I apologize. I'll delete it now, and then we'll go right back to what we're doing. So Ballard calls Kennard back up to explain what's going on. And Kennard basically says, hold fast, and tells him, hey, we're trying to formulate a plan that'll help you break contact and get over to Colonel Johnson. And Ballard at this point is happy to have any assistance he can get. 5 minutes later, Kennard's back on the radio with him and basically tells Ballard to call up Colonel Sink and tie in with him, and they can work out a tactical plan. Kennard's not at the position. He can't effectively make a plan if he can't see the battlefield. So he basically tells him to tie in with Colonel Sink again. So Ballard, who had been communicating with Colonel Sink, gets back on the radio with him, and Sink is now up in Angeville. Now, for those of you who have followed along on some of the shows I've done with Woody on World War II TV, I did a show on Vierville, and I'm probably going to dust that off, improve it, and eventually do it again on We're Not Lost Private. But it would be, if you want to find out about the fighting around Vierville, I would check that show out because I thought it's a really good tactical look at that fight. But anyway, Sink orders his 2nd Battalion to fight from Angeville all the way through Vierville. And as a result, he pushes the German force out of Vierville, and they end up pulling back northeast of Ballard's positions. And they can see this happening. In particular, Bottomley and Pelham, who is the battalion S3, spot the German force retreating across the hedgerows from them, and they can see the element of the force that's closest to them. It's about 20 Fallschirmjäger that are moving across the rear of the assembly area, and they're well within rifle and machine gun range. Pelham goes to move a couple of 30 calibers over there to take them under fire. And Bottomley's like, whoa, 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 hold up, get 4 machine guns. And Pelham kind of barks back at him and says, hey, we can't spare him. And basically Bottomley's like, no, 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 get the 4 and we'll give him a little fire and we'll see what happens. The basically it's the battalion headquarters, and some of the troopers that take the Germans under fire are essentially walking wounded. But rifle and machine gun fire pound into the German flank. 12 of them are killed. 8 of them surrender the headquarters group. And basically, they've resecured that northeastern section of the assembly area and 2nd Battalion's perimeter. While this is happening, Ballard is speaking to Sink. And Sink orders him to attack the German line again. But Ballard's like, again, here's a senior commander who is not at my position. He doesn't understand the tactical situation, and Ballard kind of pushes back and requests, some support. And Sink volunteers that he has he has some tanks available to him, and he can push him forward to Ballard. Ballard makes a formal request of it, and Sink agrees to send him. In all, he starts pushing 8 Shermans from Captain Lovair Hedges, A Company of the 746th Tank Battalion. You can see, those of you watching this, that's a dozer tank from A Company. There wasn't involved in this action, but I definitely wanted to give a hat tip to them. In particularly its 2nd platoon under 2nd Lieutenant Hugh Jones and 3rd platoon under Lieutenant W. Woods, who end up pushing forward. Now, again, in that Vierveld episode, if you check it out, I go into detail what happens to that particular company, but it ends up becoming the duty of 2nd Lieutenant Jones and his 2nd platoon of A Company 746 Tank Battalion to push down and assist Ballard. Once they complete pushing the Germans out of that area, Sink assures Ballard he's going to push the rest of his regiment, what he has of it collected, up the right flank and secure Ballard's right flank. Basically saying, once your force and my force are together, we're going to push down and clear Saint-Côme-du-Mont. Now, I'm going to read some of this right from the 746 official after action report. Let me catch up where it's at. So, meanwhile, elements of 3rd Platoon would proceed southwest and made contact with 101st elements west of the road, and 2nd Platoon had gone ahead to make contact with the elements east of the road. That would be Lieutenant Jones's platoon. He links up with Ballard. After the action in Vierville, the command tank moved to Angeville-au-Plain. That's Captain Hedges' tank. And again, that Vierville episode, I talk about what happens to his company. And the second, he eventually disengages from Angeville and ends up coming down to support 2nd Platoon. But it's Jones's platoon that ends up supporting Ballard. Jones moves up his 4 Shermans towards the assembly area and linked up with Ballard. And the pair moved forward to the closest hedgerow so that they could talk through the tactical situation. Ballard is able to advise Jones on where the German positions are. And they hash together a plan. F Company, because of the what happened with the Quincy shelling, will be relieved from the line, and D Company will take over their portion of the attack. They will be on the left flank of the battalion's attack, southwest into the German line. E Company will be attacking on the battalion's right flank. Each company will be supported by 2 Shermans from Lieutenant Jones's platoon. So basically, Jones divides his 4 Sherman platoon into 2 elements, 2 Shermans per company. And very quickly, these troopers need to learn how to work together. The tanks need to support the paratroopers, and the paratroopers need to support the tanks. Ballard assures Jones that he has not seen the emergence of any German anti-tank weapons. This is a key concern in this hedgerow fighting. It's very close quarters, and you wouldn't see a Panzerfaust or even possibly an anti-tank gun until it started firing on you. But Ballard hasn't seen any evidence of the German forces possessing any of these items, because he's only taken rifle, machine gun, and submachine gun fire to date. So they end up pushing those elements forward. And as they get to the hedgerow that's about 200 yards from the German main line of resistance, the Shermans break down into their 2 tank elements alongside their accompanying paratroopers. The going is slow as they push through the hedgerows. It was slower for Ballard's troopers as they had to match the pace of the tank. At one point, the tanks were down to about 2 miles an hour as they broke through the hedgerow. It was like a mutual protection pact. The Shermans would protect the paratroopers from the machine gun fire, and the paratroopers would protect the tanks from any anti-tank fire. It was their job to take out the German anti-tank weapons, if any appeared, before they could knock the Shermans out. And each of the columns ends up dividing amongst their tanks, so basically coming in behind the tanks. The tanks take on the fortified positions at the farms, and the troopers ensure that nobody could sneak up on the flanks and knock the tanks out. According to the operational reporting from the 746th, a Sherman is equipped with 90 main gun rounds, and according to the operational reporting for the 746, 78 to 80 rounds from each Sherman were expended during the assault, along with 15 box. Men didn't even bother with bayonets. They simply just went up and down the line, grenading these positions. They would duck out from the tank, run up, drop a grenade in the fighting position, and then run back to the cover of the tank. It was very close quarters and very personal. Um, Bottomley, who had hobbled up to assist in commanding D Company again, I go back to Donald Brown. Where was he during this time? Walter Wood, who had commanded that scratch force of 506 troopers, he moved up, and him and Bottomley were basically acting as a pair of company commanders for D Company. They lost 4 men and 6 wounded during the assault. but they captured 8 of the German 15 machine guns. Remember, Ballard had estimated there were 4 machine guns in the position. There were actually 15, and 8 of them were captured by D Company. And they essentially, once those machine gun positions are overrun, it silenced the German position, and the Germans had fully withdrawn from the line. It was 1930 hours at that point, by the time they had made it all the way down to Le Droueries. Ballard called up Sink and told him that he had secured the position, and Sink ordered him to make sure he held the area and report back in the morning for further orders. The tanks were released back to the 506 so that they could make their bivouac by darkness. They didn't want to be bivouacking at night. That would allow the Germans to infiltrate in their position. It's easier that they could bivouac, get a lay of the land, and then understand where the threat areas were, so they could react, accordingly if they thought they were being probed by German forces. So it was imperative that the tanks get lagered up before dark. In addition, Ballard's battalion was resupplied with water rations and ammo about that time. He was still worried about his right flank. The 506 hadn't pushed up yet, but he could hear Sink's men fighting as they were clearing Beaumont. Ballard moved up towards his lines, checked his men, and then kind of reorganized everybody to ensure that they had significant forces to hold the positions that the battalion had fought for so hardly over the last 48 hours. Once that was done, first battalion of the 501st pushed up their commander to take a look at the area and coordinate with Ballard, because they were going to carry on the attack towards Saint-Côme-du-Mont along with the 506, because Ballard's battalion was essentially spent. This would all set the stage for the final assault or the initial assault into Carentan, which would happen almost a week later. But they had to continue to clear this area so that they could open up that avenue attack. I mean, this is a very, like I said at the beginning of the episode, the official accounts of this particular action are so officer focused, they lose sight of the tactical battle that goes on, and you really don't hear from the enlisted men who are involved in the action. And I hope that everybody got a feel for what they had to deal with, the enlisted guys, over the course of this 2-day fight. And again, Ballard's battalion is they're not combat ineffective, but they're fairly close to it, and they eventually rejoin the regiment. But I mean, they're the amount of, can you imagine the mentality of these men as they're continually thrown back into the attack at the same place over and over again, and each time they do, the force is being whittled down. They're losing friends every time they go into the attack, but they stick with it. They keep going. This is in the minds of the men that had to take part in this assault. It was basically a test of wills. Their will over the Germans' will. They were not going to be beaten, and they knew they were fighting. After a while, they were fighting against German paratroopers, and that in itself was a challenge, because they figured these guys are probably like us. They're tough, and we're not losing to them. So it's really a really amazing case study of this battalion level tactical action when you think about everything that had to happen and the confusing nature of the fight. And for Ballard, having to piecemeal his battalion into the fight, and take advantage of having troopers from other units in his assembly area, and putting them together into a scratch force and having them go into the attack. So to me, this is a really interesting story, and I hope that all of you have enjoyed the 2-part series, and getting to know some of the men of both the 2nd Battalion of the 501st, who are the critical component and their point element in the story, but also the men of the 3rd Battalion of the 506. And those of you who have read a lot of history of the 101st during World War II know that the difficulties of that battalion during the Normandy campaign. But I hope everybody's enjoyed listening to this episode. I really enjoyed doing all the research to get this to a point where I felt comfortable presenting it as a complete story. Again, I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks again to everyone who is all my Patreon supporters again, and then all of you who follow along on YouTube and the other social media platforms. Thank you so much. It's been great. I can't wait. There's so much cool stuff happening in the future for me and the podcast, and I can't wait for you to come along for the ride on it. But thanks again, everyone, for being here and taking part in the journey and learning the story of the Second Battalion, the 501st, and their assault on La Droueries on D-Day and D+1. Everybody have a great couple of weeks, and I'll catch up with you with episode 45. Take care. Bye.